The grand courthouse stood tall against the city skyline, its stone pillars weathered by time, but still holding a sense of authority. Inside, a storm of whispers echoed through the corridors. Everyone was talking about the case of billionaire entrepreneur Richard Alden. He was accused of corruption, fraud, and exploiting workers, charges that threatened to strip him of his empire. His high-profile attorney, a man known for his charisma and cutthroat defense, had promised the trial would be an easy win. But what no one expected was betrayal. On the morning of the hearing, the attorney walked out, abandoning Richard without warning. The billionaire, who had been untouchable all his life, now sat alone at the defense table. Reporters smelled blood in the water, cameras flashed, and the crowd inside the courtroom buzzed with excitement. "Even money can't save him now," a voice whispered from the gallery. Judge Patterson, an older man with sharp eyes, banged his gavel. "Order in the court. Mr. Alden, where is your counsel?" Richard's lips trembled. For the first time in decades, he looked powerless. "Your Honor," he left. "My lawyer, he's gone." The courtroom gasped. The prosecutor smirked, ready to deliver the final blow. Billionaire or not, Richard Alden looked finished. But just as the tension hit its peak, a voice came from the back of the courtroom. It wasn't polished. It wasn't rehearsed. It came from a man in a faded janitor's uniform, holding a mop handle like a staff. "I will defend him." All eyes turned. It was Samuel Brooks, the courthouse janitor. A black man in his 50s, with lines of hard work carved into his face, Samuel had been cleaning those marble floors for over 20 years. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't educated in expensive schools. But his voice carried a weight that silenced the room. Laughter erupted. "Is this a joke?" one juror muttered. "A janitor defending a billionaire? Impossible," another scoffed. Judge Patterson adjusted his glasses. "Sir, do you even understand the seriousness of what you're saying?" Samuel stepped forward. His calm eyes met the judge's. "Yes, Your Honor. I know this man. I've seen the way he treats the workers here. He's not perfect, but he's not guilty of what they're saying. If no one else will stand for him, I will." Richard looked up, stunned. He barely knew Samuel. They had crossed paths only a few times in the building. Why would this man, with no obligation, risk everything to help him? The prosecutor sneered. "Your Honor, this is absurd. The defense is already crumbling. Now we're going to let a janitor take the floor." But Samuel didn't back down. "I may not wear a suit, but I know truth when I see it, and I'll fight for it." The judge leaned back in his chair, studying Samuel carefully. Something about his conviction made the laughter fade. Against all odds, Judge Patterson allowed him to sit at the defense table beside Richard. The trial began. The prosecutor painted Richard as a greedy billionaire who exploited people to build his fortune. He spoke of hidden contracts, unpaid workers, and backdoor deals. Every word seemed to drive Richard deeper into despair. But Samuel listened. He listened the way a man listens when the truth matters more than appearances. He wrote down details with a stubby pencil pulled from his pocket. And when it was his turn to speak, his voice shook the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Samuel began, "you've heard a story of greed and corruption. But let me tell you a different story. I may not have a law degree, but I've spent 20 years cleaning up after people. You learn to notice what others overlook. And I've seen things in this courthouse that tell me Mr. Alden isn't guilty." The courtroom froze. Nobody expected eloquence from a janitor. But Samuel had something stronger than fancy words. He had honesty. He reminded the jury of testimonies from workers who actually respected Richard, of charity donations quietly made to struggling families, of scholarships funded for young black students in the community. He pointed out inconsistencies in the prosecutor's evidence, mistakes that a proud lawyer had ignored but a humble janitor had spotted. As Samuel spoke, Richard's eyes widened with gratitude. For the first time in weeks, he felt hope. But the fight wasn't over. The prosecutor struck back viciously. "Objection. This man isn't a licensed attorney. He's manipulating the jury with stories, not facts." The judge hesitated. But then he looked at Samuel and said, "Continue." Gasps filled the room. The judge had allowed him to go on. Samuel straightened his back. You see, truth doesn't always come dressed in a suit. Sometimes it comes from the man sweeping the floors. The jury leaned in. The gallery, once mocking him, now listened with bated breath. Even the prosecutor's confidence wavered. And in that moment, Samuel Brooks, janitor, worker, unseen hero, became the voice of justice in a courtroom that had turned into a battlefield of pride, power, and prejudice. Richard Alden realized something he had never understood before. Sometimes the richest man in the room is not the billionaire with money, but the humble worker with courage. And this was only the beginning. Humbled. For once, he wasn't the billionaire everyone looked at. Samuel was. The prosecutor launched into his arguments again, this time more aggressive. He paraded witnesses who accused Richard of fraud, displaying stacks of contracts and documents meant to prove corruption. But Samuel was ready. When his turn came, he rose slowly, clutching the papers he had studied all night. He walked toward the first witness, a contractor who claimed Richard had refused to pay him. Sir, Samuel said calmly, you testified that Mr. Alden owes you $200,000. Is that correct? Yes, the man answered confidently. Samuel unfolded a sheet of paper. Then can you explain why, just 3 months ago, you signed this letter thanking Mr. Alden for settling the debt in full? The courtroom gasped. The prosecutor's face paled. The witness stammered, I didn't think anyone would. Samuel cut him off, his voice firm. You didn't think anyone would notice. But I clean these floors. I see the papers people drop. I hear the conversations people don't think matter. And I notice everything. The jury murmured. The judge raised an eyebrow, impressed. One by one, Samuel dismantled the prosecution's case. He revealed contradictions in testimonies, pointed out forged signatures, and reminded the jury of Richard's quiet acts of generosity. He wasn't quoting legal textbooks, he was speaking from truth and observation. And the more he spoke, the more the laughter that had once filled the courtroom turned to silence, then to admiration. But the prosecutor wasn't finished. He stood tall, pointing at Samuel. This is outrageous. A janitor cannot possibly understand the complexities of the law. This entire spectacle is a mockery of justice. Samuel turned to face him, his voice calm but powerful. Justice is not about who wears the most expensive suit. Justice is about truth. And truth can be seen by anyone willing to open their eyes. The gallery erupted into applause before the judge banged his gavel to restore order. Richard Alden watched in awe. For years, he had trusted wealth and power to protect him. But it was Samuel's courage, a man who owned nothing but his integrity, that was saving him. Finally, the closing statements came. The prosecutor thundered about greed and corruption, trying to regain control. But when Samuel rose for the last time, the courtroom fell completely silent. He walked to the jury box and looked each juror in the eye. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of truth. I've spent my life sweeping floors, emptying trash, and mopping up the messes of powerful men. I've seen lies covered in gold and truth buried under dirt. Today, I ask you not to look at Mr. Alden as a billionaire or as a man accused. Look at the evidence. Look at the truth. He is not guilty. And if a janitor can see that, so can you. His voice cracked slightly, but it only made the moment more real. The jury deliberated for hours. Each tick of the clock felt like a hammer against Richard's chest. Samuel sat quietly, hands folded, his face calm, but his heart pounding. At last, the jury returned. The foreman stood, holding the verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant, Richard Alden, not guilty. The courtroom exploded. Cheers rang out, cameras flashed, and Richard dropped his head into his hands, overcome with emotion. He turned to Samuel and whispered, "You saved my life." Samuel placed a hand on his shoulder. "No." The truth did. The judge banged his gavel for silence. But even Judge Patterson's stern face softened as he looked at Samuel. "Mr. Brooks, you may not have a law degree, but today you reminded this court of what justice truly means. This nation could use more men like you. Reporters rushed forward, microphones flashing. Samuel, how did you do it? What gave you the courage? Samuel simply smiled. Sometimes, when no one else will fight, you have to stand up. Even if all you have is a mop in your hands and the truth in your heart. That day, the headlines weren't about a billionaire saved from corruption. They were about a janitor who became a symbol of justice. And though Richard Alden returned to his empire, he was never the same man again. He funded scholarships for working-class students, supported workers' rights, and most importantly, he remained lifelong friends with Samuel Brooks, the janitor who stood taller than any lawyer. Because in the end, it wasn't about wealth or power. It was about courage, truth, and the reminder that heroes can come from the most unexpected places.